The World Cup has sparked protests about Brazil's persistent problems of poverty and inequality. But many say the country has made tremendous social and economic improvements since its bid for the event in 2003. To explore further, we're joined by Maria Luisa Mendon, Professor of International Relations at Rio de Janeiro University and Director at Rede Social, the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights. Thanks for joining us on the show tonight. Good to have you.
Thank you.
All right, Maria, according to a recent report from the UN Center for the Latin American Caribbean, in 2005, 38% of Brazil's population lived below the poverty line. In 2012, that figure dropped to 18.6%. So basically, since 2005, Brazil has effectively reduced the number of its citizens living in poverty by more than half. Do you think that all this negative attention about Brazil's poverty is fair then?
Well, of course, there is still a lot of inequality in Brazil, but it's also true that the employment rate is increasing in Brazil, but basically because of large infrastructure projects. So we still need to deal with problems such as poor services in terms of healthcare, education, housing, so basic rights that people in Brazil still don't have access to.
There's certainly a lot of work to be done, but the spotlight seems to be on all the negativity. And in comparison, Brazil is doing pretty well, especially when you compare it to its neighbors. How would you rate its poverty in line with other countries like Argentina and Mexico?
Well, Brazil is a very rich country. So what I think people in Brazil realized with the World Cup is that there were billions of dollars being spent on huge stadiums, and we still have a chaos situation in terms of public health, education, housing. So I think that the contrast between how much FIFA, which is a private corporation, is making billions of dollars from the World Cup in Brazil and the amount of poverty, I think that contrast is what took people to the streets.
There is a contrast and there is inequality, but there has been a lot of money spent on the stadiums, but at the same time, Brazil may be getting a bad rep because, according to Forbes, Brazil has spent about $2 billion for construction of the stadiums. That was between 2010, that's the year that the stadium construction began, and the start of this year. And at that same time, Brazil spent more than $360 billion on health and education program. So Brazil has spent nearly $200 in health and education program for every $1 spent on World Cup stadiums. What's your take on that?
Yes, but still, I think there is a long way to go. Brazilians feel that the quality of their daily living, there is a lot of improvement. The average worker needs to spend 3 hours on a very crowded bus or subway just to get to work. The conditions of urban centers are very difficult. The cost of living is very high right now in Brazil. And also the situation in the countryside is there is a lot of violence against indigenous people.
In your opinion, are there going to be any real economic benefits to the people that you've just described from the World Cup?
I don't think so, because the things they were promised, such as better public transportation, were not done. So I think that what we will see is that for a small group of people, of course, there will be some benefit, but for the majority of people who expected to have better infrastructure, better transportation, better housing conditions, I don't think it's going to change very much.
Well, Brazil is trying to control rampant inflation. The economy, the GDP has been decelerating lately. What socio-economic policies do you think President Rousseff needs to employ then to strike a balance here?
Well, I think it will be very important to implement agrarian reform in Brazil, because the amount of people who leave the countryside and go and migrate to urban centers is enormous. So we need to invest on the local markets, even to produce food. 1/3 of Brazilians don't have regular access to food. So I think producing healthy food at the local level and improving local businesses, I think would be the best solution, because so far what we see is that the large sponsors of FIFA, like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, they are the ones making the big profits with the World Cup.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight, Maria Luisa Mendon, Professor of International Relations at the University of Rio de Janeiro.